It's fantastic to have Beth Nevins with us today. Beth is the founder of Developa, a people and talent consultancy specializing in supporting venture-backed tech startups. In a previous life, she was an operator, working in senior people roles at both CloudNC and Tarabut Gateway. She's a qualified coach and all-round talent expert. We're very pleased to have her here today. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks for having me, Paddy.
Awesome. So to jump right in, can you tell us about the best, the most memorable, your favorite hire that you've ever made in your career?
And there's so many, but the best hire that I've put in my team, and then I'll talk about other people I've placed, but there's two that come to mind. One is a lady called Sally Kennard, who is an amazing recruiter that was at CloudNC. And the reason she was so amazing was because I knew nothing about building a factory when we had to do that years ago. And she was an expert, far more than I was in that domain. So a lot of high trust when I took her on the job. But she was very intuitive in terms of finding the right team fit for the company. We had very low turnover, very high success rate, which is very hard to do in manufacturing because of her people skills and intuition on EQ and behaviors. And her results are always exceptional. And then in my last company, Tarabut Gateway, I took on a lady called Jenna. Very early careers hire, which tend to be what I look for in people operations. And she was just somebody who was very, very hungry, extremely smart, but there was no project that I couldn't keep giving her in terms of complexity. She was able to scale up at the rate of the business was growing at the time, and was just excellent. Quality of the work and work ethic was fantastic. And in terms of my favourite hires or memorable ones that I've placed elsewhere, I worked at a company called River Island, and on day 2, I had to hire a technical architect or a very, very senior engineer. And I was in a building that was separate to the engineers at the time. And the VP of engineering walked over and just by coincidence could see that I was talking to someone on the phone. In the office back in the day. And when I put the phone down, he said, I know that guy. He's one of the best engineers I've ever worked with historically. And I placed him in my first week. And he became the director of technology and architecture for the whole company years later. I believe he's still there today in a 1,000+ person company. So that's fantastic. And I also placed many people in weird and wonderful ways. I've placed fantastic people very recently from an event that I went to, a very forward-thinking event. So automatically talking to them, I knew they were at the forefront of technology and also people practices in a different domain that I went to. And I convinced them out of those events to go and join 2 startups. One is yet to join, so I can't name their name, but very, very good. And then I also have placed very recently a world-class COO, very experienced operator that I've known for many years because I didn't place them in another company that they weren't quite right for, but I knew they were world-class for another consumer company that I'm currently working for. And 4 years later, I've placed him in this very, very good big raise business right now. And he's very good.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow. Speaks to the power of long-term relationships, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Well, Beth, that's really interesting. You've given us a couple of examples there of people that have really excelled. When you sort of think about those across the hires that you've made, the people that have come in and just done exceptionally well, are there any commonalities? Are there any sort of common threads between those people? Like in your mind, what makes the difference between a good and a great hire? Is it skill? Is it attitude? Is it luck? Is it the manager? For you, what is it that makes a great hire?
It's always attitude. And there's a few, I've actually thought about this. There's a few things that I have been thinking about on the difference of good to great. And I'm going to run through my list. So first of all, good is interested, but great is obsessed. That's rule number 1. The second, good is reliable, but great is edgy. And by that, I mean, they may be an outlier in your team. They may ask for forgiveness sometimes. They may not play it safe all the time in their approach to the methodology or the practices you've had before. Will deliver on time, but great will improve your speed of delivery. That's very important. Good will give you the results that you've asked for, but great will exceed your results and go the extra mile. And I got a story on that. I had a recruiter called Stephen in my last company. In terms of going the extra mile, I remember there was this one candidate for this job we absolutely had to have. It was a very difficult role. And I remember, bless him, he must have had Slack on his phone, on his app, and he was out walking his dog. And I remember him saying, I've got to turn around because she's finally responded and she's only free for 10 minutes. And, that is the truth, to be honest, of startups. The job is all encompassing and you have to go the extra mile if you want to move the dial on the business. So, that impressed me a lot. I'd say good is consistent, but great gives you growth. So what I mean by that is you have hockey sticks in your actual results that keep exponentially going up. And in order to do that, the hire has to be, caring about their own growth, a sponge-like personality, continuously learning and experimenting and iterating to keep growing themselves in order to grow the business. So that's, really, really key in startups. And then around like quality, good is someone who will meet your standards in terms of quality, but great will have their own standards and they're usually higher than yours.
Yeah, interesting.
That's very important.
I saw as a recent interview with Eric Schmidt, I think it was, and he said, hire the divas.
Oh, my sister rang me up to tell me about that. She said, "You're a diva."
There you go. There you go. Well, I'm glad you said it. I think that's really true. Like I think when I think back to the most talented people I've hired and I've worked with, they are different and they have different expectations and they want different things, and sometimes they're a little bit more challenging.
100%. Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting dynamic, particularly for junior managers and hiring managers to deal with, is that sometimes really talented people show up. And, one thing I've noticed with hiring managers is that they'll, particularly the more junior ones, is they'll craft quite a small box and they'll say, this is what I want, fill the box. Mm-hmm. And when you find a really exceptional candidate, they'll kind of see that, to take this metaphor too far, they'll see that box and they'll go, but I can do all these other things. And I think sometimes that becomes a bit of a blocker, actually, when I think it's actually a really good sign.
I agree. And this kind of relates back to my point about being edgy, is actually, ironically, the good hires are ones that I pay less attention to. The great ones, actually, I spend more time with because I need to, because they're more likely to take the risks. So we have more sparring together on that. It's not to stop them, but, 1 in 10 times or 1 in 100 times, to be, more realistically, like a customer might get annoyed because they've tried something different or something's gone a bit wrong. They're the ones that actually may be the risky ones and you're digging them out of a hole. But the risk reward is far greater in terms of the performance over time than the consistent, good, reliable player. So
yeah, it's super interesting. I spend a lot of time coaching managers and, trying to explain to them, I was like, as managers, we often spend a lot of time on our lowest performers.
Yeah.
We spend most of our time on people that actually require the most support just to get to par. Whereas actually those kind of edgy high performers that, they might be more demanding of your time, that is where your energy needs to go.
Well, and particularly when statistically, the truth is in startups, there is a handful of people on a CEO's hand at any given time that are really moving the dial in the business. It's as simple as that. And even if you're saying that you've got high performance and that you believe that 50% of your business is there, the truth is you want to keep growing still the 5% in that company, however you define high performance. So, I agree with you on that completely. And then I suppose on smarts, like the good person will like solve your main case problem and get that. I think a great person will solve the main case and all the edge cases that will sort of come with that too. And I suppose my last point, which I think is the most important, is a good hire is content, easy to work with and happy with themselves and their situation. A great person is very personally ambitious because they've got something to prove. And I love that. And I dig for that in interviews.
That's really interesting. How do you talk about digging for that in interviews? How do you look for that? What are the hallmarks? Because people obviously show up in different ways and speak differently and say different things, but how do you know when you've got one of those people on the phone?
I like to know their life story. I like to know where they've been resilient in their life. I remember someone told me that they got made redundant in COVID and their strategy for finding a job out of that was just unbelievable. The story they told me, like really, really smart, well thought. And just by hook or by crook, they were like, I'm not being unemployed during COVID, and just found a way. I just love those types of stories around the more about their life personality and behaviors to life situations that happen to them, not just what they've done and excelled at work, because the two go hand in hand quite often. So that's really interesting to know their life stories, particularly if they've moved different countries, how do they adapt to that? The life stories are probably more interesting than the work stories.
And what is it that you're looking for in there? Is it resilience? Is it a spark? I guess what tangibly, if you were to try to...
Yeah, resilience, adaptability, real belief that most or all problems can be solved rather than, and a believer that they can control their destiny, i.e. that they don't wait for things to happen to them, they make things happen for them. So that's quite important when I'm chatting to them.
Love that, Beth. I think that's mega. Next question. What's the most difficult role you've ever had to fill?
Yes. So I don't believe there's difficult roles, but I believe there's difficult situations and challenging situations to hire a role in. So, for example, just being super honest, that you can have a very inexperienced founder that needs a lot of coaching in order to get the success of that role to happen, whether that's teaching them to close or sell a company or understand the role in more detail of what they actually want. So that can make things really, really challenging. The constraints that you might operate with will make the role more challenging to hire around salary, low brand of the team. Some business models are harder to sell than others, so you have to operate within all of those constraints. And I'll be very frank, building founding teams is harder than executive search. And why? Because by the time you're hiring seasoned execs, is that you have a brand, you have traction. There are funding and other things that make things more comfortable for a C-level to be more open to conversation. And the challenge then with those roles is more about closing than attraction. But the challenge of founding team makeup is attraction in the first place, plus closing as well. So it's all those things, against you that you need to really be a player on that. So I've done really amazing, found type hires and founding teams in the last 6 months. And that has taken me an outreach of a genuine market map of about 1,000 engineers to get the one hire that was in the most niche team at Google to go into this tiny team of 4 people. The effort you put in for founding teams is far greater in terms of the input needed and all the strategy that you've got to pull every tool out of the box to get those types of hires. Then I would take an executive role any day over a founding team hire. Although for my sins, I keep doing them because I enjoy it. But, they are really hard to do.
Awesome. That's great. Thinking about roles where you've hired in the past where it hasn't worked out for whatever reason, there wasn't the right fit or the candidate, didn't quite enjoy the role, whatever it may be. What are the biggest lessons you've learned from hires that haven't worked out?
Yeah. So in startups, there's kind of 3 things I kind of see things don't work out. One is usually like a culture clash, and that can be through a values misalignment. So that just doesn't, the things that the founder cares about is not what the employee or the new hire might believe in. It can be too that they're not adaptable to that culture and that way of working as well. That just hasn't aligned on. I've actually pulled an offer in the last 12 months because of something a leader said to me at the final hour. And that's when you've got to have the EQ and the bravery to say to a CEO, I don't think this is the right person. And I've placed many people consequently because of that integrity with CEO, because of that, for the right thing for the company. I could have made that placement and made lots of money, but it's not the right thing to do. And the reason for that is with leaders, you have this really, it's hard to articulate, but between a head of and a C-level, you've got a lot of leaders wanting to prove themselves in startups. And the problem without having lots of life experience and knowing your own value, knowing that takes time to prove it, heads off to C-level before you get here with like 20 years plus experience, think, not always, but some of the difficult ones, think that they need to come in and have pure autonomy. And I've got 15 years or 12 years experience, so I should just come in and be left to build my department and completely on their own. Where a C-level who's got lots and lots of experience and doesn't need to prove that as much is by default very collaborative with a founder and understands that actually, most of any relationships in life is around compromise. So if the founder's got strong views that aren't quite right, they have the EQ and the maturity to know that actually the point is you've got to stand the test of time with a founder, not debate these things, to go on that journey together of trust, because trust is earned. And not everyone understands that as a leader in startup. So I'll give you an example. I joined a company and, week 1, the CEO flew over and spent 3 hours telling me how to do recruitment. Now, they were wrong for 90% of it. But I don't say anything because they don't know what I know yet, and I don't know anything about their business. So you have to sit there and have the maturity in your probation to understand each other and build up the quick wins and play ball enough early on, because what you know is important to save and grow that business if you really believe in your skills. But part of that is going on the journey with the CEO, and you have to deliver first what they want before they start trusting in delivering and giving you what you know is, know what's right for the company. So that clashes on the leadership maturity can happen if you're not really on the pulse on that from an EQ perspective. Then the second one is negativity. Absolutely a killer. In attitude is my number one thing I don't like. So I'll give you an example. A CTO wanted to hire someone, and I was doing the culture interview as a VP of people as the last sort of sense check of the round. And, candidates are on their best behavior in the interview, and they were very, very negative throughout the interview. So pleasant experience and nice talking to them. But at the end of the wash up with the team, and the recruiter was there, the CTO there, the head of engineering there, I said, I'm telling you now, this is a management headache awaiting to happen. I know they're technically very good, but there's red flags all over this. Now, of course, you could argue that I should veto that and put my foot down, but I also believe 1 in 10 times the CTO needs to have, the right to make the decision. The high went ahead causes all sorts of problems in the job.
I was going to say, that's interesting. I think back to the hires that have gone wrong. There's always an inkling.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen someone come through, do unbelievably, and then it kind of blow up inexplicably in the first few months, right? But it's when you're kind of in a situation where you're looking for it. You're looking, as I call it, you're looking for yeses rather than looking for nos.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you start looking for yeses, like reasons why to do it, I think that you're in trouble. I think the best piece of recruitment advice I got very early on in my career when I was working in agency was like, qualify out, don't qualify in.
Yes.
And that stuck with me forever.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I suppose my third one, which is common in startups, is through no fault of their own. It's through founders going on the experience journey and maybe not having a people person in earlier on. So this is fine. But the thing where you need to have some good outside advice then is on the leveling misalignment. So this can be quite common, and I'm seeing this a lot more recently. Founders naturally will take more of a bottom-up approach to hiring. So they hire like quite a lot of individual contributors, which makes sense. You've got the work that needs to be done. But then when they start hiring leaders, they still want to sort of underhire the type of leadership they might need. Now, the leveling you need goes up based on complexity and the rate of growth of your business. So if you've got really good, strong product market fit and you're growing like Billy-O, happy days, great problem to have. The reality is, bringing in a junior manager in on top of, individual contributors may not be the best idea. And particularly this is commensurate when you've got quite experienced, quite frankly, CEOs or founders who've got life experience. The level at which they start thinking has a higher expectation on the talent than someone who's perhaps less experienced starting a company. So when I'm working with quite experienced ex-operator CEOs, if they hire in ahead of, the reality is they don't spar with them very well because they can't look at the lens at which they think together. And then the reality is it's because the scale at which they're growing, they need more strategy.
So do you think that's them hiring those sort of more experienced founders are actually under hiring for what they need?
Both. It's under hiring for what they need, and also not recognizing that actually the sweet sauce or the secret sauce in the recipe is to have hands-on VPs and a flat structure, which I am very, very big proponent of. In terms of the A to B onwards design maker.
That's awesome. Well, that's probably the most jam-packed 20 minutes anyone's going to get. Beth, I know that we could go on all day, and would love to have you back soon. But thank you for sharing those nuggets of wisdom with us, and we'll speak to you again soon. Take care.
Thank you, Paddy. I have to dash, but thank you so much for having me. Speak to you soon.